Van Dyke once said, "A friend is what the heart needs at all times." Henry also failed to mention the heart's need for oxygen, proper valve opening and closing, and proper ECG activity. Understanding the overall anatomy of the heart will allow us to better understand why all of these aspects play a huge role in maintaining proper heart activity. The overall anatomy of the heart has surpassed the Renaissance ideas of the heart being just 4 chambers with 2 ventricles and 2 auricles. The heart is also a 2-sided pump. The right side of the heart pumps blood to the lungs and is known as the pulmonary circuit, and the left side of the heart pumps blood to the rest of the body and is known as the systemic circuit. The left side is larger because of its role in pumping blood to all of the organs, muscles, and tissue layers throughout the body. The right atria of the heart receives blood from the inferior vena cava, superior vena cava, and coronary sinus. These vessels of the heart carry deoxygenated blood into the heart so that the blood can be pumped out from the pulmonary trunk into the lungs to get oxygenated. The left atrium side of the heart receives blood from the pulmonary veins. This blood is oxygenated and is pumped out the large aortic vessel, which pumps the blood to the rest of the body, tissues, organs, and muscles. The heart is encased in the mediastinum, which is the medial cavity of the thorax. The posterior surface of the heart is known as the base, near the right shoulder, with the apex of the heart toward the left hip. The double-walled sac, known as the pericardium, encases the heart to protect the heart, anchors surrounding structures, and prevents overfilling of the heart with blood. Closer to the heart is the serous membrane, which is made up of both a parietal and visceral layer. The parietal layer lines the fibrous pericardium, then turns inferiorly after attaching to arteries exiting the heart to become the visceral layer. The visceral layer lies directly around the heart, making up of the heart wall. Between the 2 layers is the pericardial cavity, which contains serous fluid that inhibits any friction. The microscopic anatomy of the heart involves intercalated discs and gap junctions. These play a large role in conducting electrical impulses properly so that the whole heart contracts together in a functional syncytium. In simpler terms, both right and left ventricles will contract at the same time. Before understanding the proper functioning of blood flow to and from the heart, we must look into how the structures of the atria and ventricles play a large role in proper filling and emptying of blood between chambers. The 2 atria of the heart are separated by the interatrial septum, and the 2 ventricles are separated by the interventricular septum. Between the atria and ventricles lie the atrioventricular valves. When atria contract, blood is pushed into the ventricles. These valves help prevent the backflow of blood back into the atria. The left valve is called the bicuspid valve and contains 2 flexible cups, while the right valve between the right atrium and right ventricle has 3 flexible cups and is known as the tricuspid valve. When the heart is relaxed, the AV nodes hang loosely, allowing the passing of blood from atria into ventricles. When the ventricles contract, the pressure inside increases and blood is pushed against the walls of the ventricles. This force closes the AV valves, allowing blood from the ventricles to pass into the aorta/pulmonary trunk. When the ventricles then relax, the AV valves open again because the intraventricular pressure has decreased. The heart also has semilunar valves between the left ventricles and aorta, which is the left systemic circuit, and the right ventricle and pulmonary trunk, which is the right pulmonary circuit. Similar to the AV nodes, these nodes open and close in response to intraventricular pressure. When the intraventricular pressure inside the ventricles is greater than that of the aorta and pulmonary trunk, the valves will open, allowing blood to pass through. When the intraventricular pressure decreases, the valves will close. The ability of the heart to beat in a proper rhythm is due primarily from pressure changes within the ventricles and the opening and closing of these valves. This is later looked into as the electrocardiogram of the heart. The anatomy and structures of the heart will allow it to achieve its overall goal in delivering blood and oxygen throughout the body. Thinking in terms of a single red blood cell, we can understand the overall effects of the heart. Starting in the right atrium, the atrium is filling with blood and diastole is occurring. When the pressure in the atria rises above that in the ventricle, the atrium will contract, entering systole. The tricuspid valves are open at this point, and the red blood cell moves into the right ventricle. The right ventricle is now filling with blood. When the pressure in the ventricle surpasses the pressure in the right atrium, the bicuspid valve will close. Ventricles contract and semilunar valves open. Blood is now pumped into the pulmonary trunk, where it will be sent to the lungs. The semilunar valves close when the ventricles relax, preventing backflow of blood. The red blood cell is now in the lungs, where carbon dioxide is being released from the blood and newly fresh oxygen is entering. From there, the newly oxygenated blood needs to get through the body. Thus, in order to be pumped to all of the muscles and tissues, the blood will enter into the left atrium from the pulmonary veins. When the pressure in the left atrium is greater than that of the left ventricle, atria will contract and blood will fill into the left ventricle. When the ventricle pressure is greater than atria, bicuspid valves will close. The left ventricle pressure increases above the aortic pressure. Ventricular contraction occurs, semilunar valves open, and the blood is moved into the aorta. The semilunar valves close once the ventricles relax. The aorta then pumps this blood to the systemic branches coming off the aorta, which include many arterial systems that supply blood to lower extremities.
So before we go into how the electrical activity corresponds to pressures in the heart's ventricles, we should go over electrical activity.
The electrical activity inside the heart. What does it consist of and how does it work? To understand this, we will learn about the heart's conduction system. The conduction system is the system by which the heart beats and contracts via electrical impulses, ultimately to pump blood. One thing about the heart is that it does not depend on impulses from the nervous system. Instead, it will contract even if all of the nerve connections are disconnected. This is why the conduction system of the heart is described to be intrinsic. The very specialized non-contractile myocardial tissue makes up the system. This intrinsic factor ensures that 1. The heart muscle will depolarize in a methodical way, and 2. The heart will beat as one coordinated unit. Now let's go over how the conduction system of the heart actually works, starting with the beginning of the impulse. In order for the heart to contract, it needs a stimulus. This stimulus is provided by the SA node located in the right atrium of the heart. It sits just inferior to the superior vena cava opening here. The SA node is the pacemaker of the heart and sets the rate of depolarization for the heart. The impulse then spreads from the SA node throughout the atria. It also travels to the AV node here at the junction in the lower atrial septum, and immediately after this electrical wave, the atria contract. The impulse pauses momentarily for about 0.1 second at the AV node. This allows the atria to complete their contraction. The impulse then passes through the AV bundle, which connects the atria to the ventricles here. Then it passes through the right and left bundle branches. The bundle branches conduct the impulse through the interventricular septum here. The Purkinje fibers are the last stop for the impulse before the ventricles finally contract. It's important to note that this depolarization wave pathway can only be transmitted from the atria to the ventricles via the passage between the AV node and the AV bundle, because the atria and ventricles are actually separated from each other by this region of connective tissue that is electrically inert. Therefore, if there should be any damage to the AV node AV bundle pathway, the SA node would partially or totally be prevented from influencing the ventricles. This is critical information regarding our case of bundle branch block. But before we delve into the condition, we will take a look into how electrical activity of the heart corresponds to the rising and decreasing pressures within the heart's ventricles.
Bundle branch block happens when part of the conduction system is blocked. Therefore, when your heart sends the impulse down the conduction system and there is an obstruction, then the impulse will not be properly sent to the right or to the left ventricles of your heart. If an impulse is blocked as it travels through the bundle branches, you are said to have bundle branch block. Bundle branch block is a condition in which there is a delay or obstruction along the pathway that electrical impulses travel to make your heart beat. These obstructions can be easily seen in an ECG. With a bundle branch block, your heart may not be getting enough oxygen. Therefore, your heart tissue can die, which is known as ischemia. Other researchers have found that because of the risk of ischemia, people with bundle branch block are at an increased risk for heart disease than people who do not have bundle branch block. Lastly, since bundle branch block does affect the electrical activity of the heart, it can sometimes complicate the accurate diagnosis of other conditions like heart attacks, and then that can lead to delays in proper management of those problems. The delay or blockage may occur on the pathway that sends the electrical impulses to the left or the right side of the bottom chambers, the ventricles, of your heart. A heart attack can trigger a bundle branch block as well as high blood pressure. Thickened or weakened or stiffened heart muscle can also induce a bundle branch block. A septal defect, a hole in the wall that normally separates the upper chambers of the heart, can also cause a BBB. The main complication of bundle branch block is a slow heart rate, which can sometimes cause fainting. So why should we worry about bundle branch block? Because it can sometimes be a warning sign of other more serious heart conditions. For example, it might mean that a small part of your heart is not getting enough oxygen-rich blood. Also, other researchers have found that people who have left bundle branch block may be at a greater risk for heart disease than are people who do not have the condition.
An ECG is a composite of all the action potentials generated by nodal and contractile cells at a given time. Essentially, it's a tracing of the heart's electrical activity as it progresses through the cardiac cycle that Susie had explained earlier. In order to track this electrical activity, electrodes are placed on specific points throughout the body to create what we call a lead, a view of the electrical activity of the heart from a particular angle across the body. A 12-lead ECG provides spatial information about the heart's electrical activity in 3 orthogonal directions, from right to left, superior to inferior, and anterior to posterior. Where the corresponding pairs of electrodes are placed on the body determines the lead produced. However, the way an ECG tracing will present is dependent on 2 major factors, the lead you are looking at and how the electrical events are happening within the heart. That being said, we will focus on how an ECG presents itself in a normal lead 1 reading, where a single negative electrode is placed on the right arm and a single positive electrode is placed on the left arm. Any current flowing to the left towards the left arm's electrode produces a positive deflection on the ECG, while any current flowing to the right produces a negative deflection. So what we're looking at is a pretty standard ECG reading in lead 1. A standard ECG is recorded at a speed of 25 millimeters per second, where 1 millimeter is the distance between each vertical line, and the thicker pink lines are 5 millimeters apart. On the y-axis, the voltage scale is 1 millivolt equals 10 millimeters, and again, the thick pink lines are 5 millimeters apart. This will be important later, especially when we begin to compare the length of each deflection in a normal reading to a reading for someone with bundle branch block. This first small deflection is the P wave, which lasts about 0.08 seconds and results from the movement of the SA nodal depolarization through both the atria. Soon after this depolarization occurs, the atria contract. This current then travels along the internodal pathway to the AV node. Yet, even when this depolarization reaches the AV node, it does not fire immediately given its slow conduction velocity. This delay can be seen on the ECG as the PR interval, representing the time interval from the onset of atrial depolarization, or the beginning of the P wave, to the onset of ventricular depolarization, or the beginning of the QRS complex. This ventricular depolarization results in the large QRS complex, preceding ventricular contraction. Its complicated shape is a result of the directional changes that the depolarization waves take throughout the ventricular walls, causing changes in direction on the ECG. Normally, the QRS complex is between 0.08 to 0.1 seconds. Atrial repolarization occurs during this time as well, but because it takes place during ventricular contraction, the representing wave is obscured by the QRS complex. Immediately following the QRS complex is the ST segment, which represents the depolarization of the entire ventricular mass and where all myocytes are in the plateau phase of the cardiac action potential. At this point, ventricular depolarization is complete, and the myocytes are in their absolute refractory period, where no amount of stimulation will cause another action potential. What typically follows is ventricular repolarization, evidenced on the ECG as the next deflection after the ST segment has passed. This repolarization is the T wave. The ventricular repolarization becomes at the apex of the heart and proceeds backwards through the ventricles as they repolarize. Once the ECG flattens out, ventricular repolarization is complete and the heart is ready to fire through the conduction system again.